Oh, we're talking again in terms of how planets are affecting us. And as I mentioned, the moon affects us, so does uh, the relationship of planets to each other. This is something that John Nelson, the head engineer at RCA, studied for over 20 years. And he found out that when planets astrologically were in harmonious geometries relative to each other, such as trines, triangular, then the energy, the flow of the electric field of this planet is smooth. In other words, in the ionosphere, electromagnetic radiation travels smoothly. He was studying this for the sake of maximizing radio wave transmission for the company. He published this within company, and it never really got out fully to the public because that makes a big difference, a great difference, knowing that astrological combinations of planets will affect the electric field of this planet. We are bioelectric, so of course that's going to affect us. So when planets were in difficult astrological combinations to each other, geometries, then that created a lot of static or disturbance in the electric field of this planet. And indeed, the ancient astrologers and seers of Vedic times, they talked about how planets in these difficult aspects, they create a kind of a difficulty in life also. One feels more stressed or there's more disturbance going on. And when planets are in harmonious aspects to each other, then it just everything flows more smoothly in our lives. So this was something that the Max Planck Institute, as well as the engineer at RCA, was studying, and Carl Jung was aware of the study by the Max Planck Institute, and he said, well, the cosmic energies, they certainly affect us. And as I mentioned, he was a great astrologer. He used astrology for all his patients, and he wrote actually a beautiful book about astrology. If you take all his comments about astrology, they show he's very intelligent about it. He understood it, and he even tried to communicate some of that to the great astrologers of India, such as B.V. Raman in the earlier 20th century. So then let us think about how will we set up a system. Let's imagine we're the first ones doing this. How do we set up a system where we can understand the influence of different planetary energies upon humanity? So it started, and this came to me as a real revelation. So what happened, I had my father passed away, and my mother passed away 11 months earlier. So March 15 last year that happened. And just as a personal comment, and some of you have experienced this, others may or may not believe it even. But the day after my father passed away and I was grieving, suddenly I was in the bathroom not expecting anything. Suddenly my mother and my father were there in my consciousness. They completely were there. There's no doubt. And my father communicated to me how happy he was being reunited with my mom again. They were sweethearts for 75 years. My father died at almost 102. My mother died at 95. And they were sweethearts from childhood, basically. And they always loved each other very much. So it helped to know that Dad was doing okay. I was really taken by surprise when they both came in, and they kind of, that unity that I felt, that love, that united love was there, and they communicated to me that they were happy together again. And then the second thing that happened was there was a blessing given, a spiritual blessing for my work, for my spiritual work. And for my astrology work and my honoring the divine through worship. And so that was the beginning of this time when I started to nonstop think, why does astrology work? I didn't even know what form that blessing that my parents gave me would take. It's just I knew they blessed me and then they went. And I didn't know that suddenly the next thing that evening I can't stop thinking, obsessing about why does astrology work. So I want to share that with you. It took me 3.5 weeks, actually more like 4 weeks almost, to really, really get it. And to do that, I had to study the whole history of how time was kept, how months were established, how different calendars. I had to read the ancient Vedic texts on astrology in their own original language. I read Greek text of Ptolemy, the great writer around 180 AD, who wrote about the knowledge of astrology for the West. I mean, he was a great Western astrologer and scientist. And then I read about Hipparchus, who lived about 200 BC, and so on, and as well as Western astrologers, and read Carl Jung, and putting it all together. Also Egyptian, Sumerian approach to things in terms of astrology. And putting everything together, finally, I had that aha moment. And I realized this is how it works, and it's very logical. It comes from acute observation. It makes sense. And there's nothing mystical. It's just very clear. So here it is. This is what I found. So I'm going to draw a picture. And it's to start us off, to understand. So the picture I'm drawing, and I've got to tell you, it's not going to be great artwork, but here we are. Okay, so we have a circle. Okay, now think of it as the equator is in the middle, and then we have the Earth, and the seasons. The Vedic literature says that the seasons start here with spring. The Earth, the sun is lined up here at the equator, so day and night are equal, and then the sun rises higher and higher, reaches a peak in summer. So that's summer. And then it goes again down, it's high to the equator in fall equinox. And then, so it's going like this. And then it reaches the lowest point below the equator in winter. Okay. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but I'm simplifying, because actually, when you think about it, this is not really the Earth, it's just the circular path of the sun above and below the equator. And it's lined up with, in the equator, it's lined up with, because Earth is tilted, it's lined up with all these different signs. So it's more like let's see if I can draw it. I'm not sure I can draw it, but something like this. And I say at the equator, and it's kind of like a, so you have a, so these are, so it's kind of like this, where you've got this Earth, and then there is this zodiac, all the different stars. But in order to make it simple, we're going to just keep it like this. We say this path where the sun goes above the equator and then below the equator and lines up with these different constellations. That we're just going to keep it simple. So just think Earth, above and below the equator, spring, summer, highest point, fall, nature is shutting down, going inward for winter, and then winter at the lowest point below the equator. Which also means that the actual astrology was developed by ancient people that lived above the equator. Because in the Vedic text, it makes it very clear that spring starts when the sun is at the equator and day and night are equal, and that the sun rises higher and higher. In fact, it's listed that every month there's a different solar energy. It's talked about in terms of the 12 adityas, the 12 energies of each one is different. So the first part of spring, that's the datar, the giver of life. And so that gave me some clues. These ancient texts, like in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Vishnu Purana, they talk about this 12 adityas, 12 energies, 12 types of angels and sages that are associated with each month as the energies move. So we could think of the travel, if we talk about summer, fall, spring, summer, fall, and winter. You could see spring, summer, fall, and winter. Well, this circle that the sun makes every year, it's divided into 4 parts, 4 seasons, like 4 quadrants. Now, the ancients were very smart. They said, well, there's the beginning of something, the beginning of the season, there's the middle of the season, and then there is the last part of the season where things change into the next season. So they divided this circle that the sun makes above and below the equator into each quadrant into 3 parts. 3 equal parts. So spring to summer is beginning. So they called the beginning of the energy of spring, they called that cardinal or movable energy. Then the middle of the season, they called that fixed energy. And then the last part, they called that dual or changing. So that's where you have this allocation of each sector of the circle as cardinal or movable, fixed, and dual or changing. Because this is the part where there's a changing energy. So each season is divided into those 3 sectors. I thought someone was at the door. So when we look, we see that each season is divided into 3 sectors. All right? So there we have the 12 sectors, starting with spring. Of the energies, the solar energy going above and below the equator. And that is the beginning of the astrology chart and its 12 sectors. But there's more if you wait just a second.